Okay, everybody, how are we all doing? Welcome to a new episode of Editor's Desk, this show where we give you a sense of what's happening behind the headlines, and I give you a sense of how news is made and what's going on. My name is Mike, and I want to start this first one because I just got back to the UK. I want to talk about my third trip to Israel. I was in Israel because I was there for an international media summit where we had journalists all around the world gather in Israel. And the whole point was to explore how the Middle East is reported in the media, how the war ends, the stories you're seeing, how they come together. And so in this episode, I want to give you a sort of summary, if you like, of my key findings on this third trip to Israel. I want to talk mainly about the differences you see between reading about Israel and actually being on the ground, right? Perceptions versus reality. I want to talk about the perception that when you go to Israel, you get radicalized. I want to talk about the human stories, the complexities, all the stuff you don't often see. And I'll pause a few times and we can explore how some of these things come to be in a minute. So I was in Israel for 7 days in total. It was amazing. It was fast-paced. And one of the things I think I now notice is how, Israel on the ground and Israel on the page are almost night and day. And it's really hard to express this to people. But honestly, guys, it is so different reading an article about Israel where you're getting facts and figures and strategic narratives. I mean, it's one of those topics where everyone's got a narrative. It's very different reading that. And actually being on the ground, right? When you're reading a perspective that's filtered through a global sort of lens, it's very different to being on the ground and kind of burying yourself in the sort of Middle East psyche. And so one of the key things I think I now have is a different texture of the reality, right? So when you go to Israel, of course, now you're seeing neighborhoods, you're hearing stories from families who are mourning, families who are disrupted. You're meeting people and you're seeing their day-to-day choices. And these people aren't interested in grand geopolitics, right? People are interested in staying alive. They're interested in staying connected, in staying hopeful. And the summit was helpful in helping us see what gets written, how it's edited, and how things play out in real life. One of the things that I can say very quickly is, when you when you go to Israel, there's this fear people have. And I was speaking recently to Rabbi Pesach, who is Steve Bannon called him the MAGA rabbi. He's one of the episodes. He's one of the guests on the podcast we've got coming up soon. He was talking about how one of the things he saw or he's seen is when people go to Israel and they come back from Israel and they're a bit more nuanced, and maybe some of them are pro-Israel, maybe some of them are speaking in sort of nuanced terms. People often accuse them of being radicalized. Like, what have they done to you on this trip you went to in Israel? And he said one of the reasons he thinks that happens is because the reality of what's happening on the ground is so far apart from what you actually read that when you come back, so when you go to Israel, you take a look for yourself and you ask questions to ordinary people on the streets, not to paid actors or to people with perspectives, ordinary people on the street. When you hear their stories and you go, and you arrive at a place that's more nuanced, when you come back here, people are so shocked because they're like, how can it be so different from what we're reading? Like, how can it be so different such that you've come back and you now have a different perspective, or you have a more richer perspective? And ergo is where you see how successful the lobbies or the narratives have been when people who maintain a balanced, honest, truthful view are labeled as radicalists. It is very, very different. And I hate to say it that you have to go there, but you do have to go there to really get a sense of that gap between what it is you see in the UK and where you are, and the reality on the ground, right? And in journalism, that matters. It matters to get underneath the stories, underneath the headlines, and to actually explore what's going on. There is another interesting thing I think I've seen, which is this perception of radicalizations, right? So one of the things I encountered on this particular trip was how easily the term radicalization is is sort of deployed, right? As a shorthand. So whether was in the media or it's in policy circles, we heard experts talk about young people, ideology, group identity, marginalization. But again, when I was on the ground, many people I spoke to, they didn't think of themselves as radicalists, right? Or radicalized. They just thought about themselves as isolated, frustrated members of a community that want dignity, right? They saw themselves as stuck in a system and they wanted to shake things out. And so the summit challenged me actually to shift from using that term radicalized, right? And to instead be asking the question, why is this person disconnected? Right? What's the story behind this label? When I got to go into Bethlehem, a place that's like majority Muslim, I'm speaking to people on the ground and I'm trying to explore, like, why is it they believe what they believe? Is it that there's just radical folks, or is it that they hold a nuanced position, which they've been almost forced into? Sorry, not nuanced position. Is it that they hold a human position, right, which is that they want dignity, and they've been forced, if you like, into this catchment as radicalists or people who've been radicalized? All in all, the main thing I think you get from going to this place is realizing that we're actually talking about human stories and complexity, and the framing we have in about the Middle East, I don't think is helpful at all, right? The biggest takeaway, I think, for me, from the 3 trips I've taken now, is that human stories matter more than ever, right? When we think about war, conflict, politics, it all becomes real when you meet the human beings living in them. If you're in your room right now just typing away, saying all sorts of stuff, you're not really getting to the heart, right? When I was in Israel, I met a young Israeli journalist, right, whose life was changed because of the war. I was in the Palestinian community and meeting Palestinian leaders who spoke about hope and how the smallest gestures moved them, right? I met a peace project advocate who reminded me that narratives matter, right? These stories resist that simple framing of us versus them, right? That fits very neatly into our sort of modern Western mind. It's easy to publish stories where there's a good guy and a bad guy, but the honest truth is far more messy. And I think the summit I just came back from a few days ago emphasized how framing changes a story. It changes how you remember people, how you think about people. And it really challenged us as media professionals to think, are we reporting the sort of blast radius of a missile or the family that lost their home? Right? Are we reporting about a radicalized youth group or a youth that lost their job, that lost their dignity, that lost their future, and now hold certain beliefs? All of those things may seem innocuous, but for me, that's what it did. It invited me into the nuance. And so at the Common Sense Network, I'm thinking as we move forward, well, we need to invite people into nuance as well, right? We need to invite people to reject the binary framing of good guy, bad guy, David and Goliath, all these simple framing. And we need to invite people to think and sit in the tension and complexity of all the different voices, right? So for me, this trip was my boots on the ground, right? This was my boots on the ground takeaway. I hope if you're listening or still watching, it gives you a fresh lens about this region, and it helps you think more sort of subtly, if you like, about media, the conflict, narratives, and the fact that, we're talking about human beings here. If you're working in any professional field, right, whether it's media, whether it's policy, social entrepreneurship, faith, like this story matters, right? This region matters because when you engage with people's real stories rather than abstract labels, you can start to change what other people see about them, right? You can start to change even what you see about yourself. So ultimately, I'm inviting you to step into the nuance. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't done so, do subscribe, drop a comment, let me know what you think, and I will see you on the next episode of Editor's Desk.